Attorney Amos N. Jones is a native of Lexington, returns to his home state frequently to lecture and to consult in the area of constitutional law, civil rights, and African American heritage.
We begin our tour at Lexington Center, the ever-expanding convention center, home of Rupp Arena, the largest basketball-dedicated facility in the world. But we go beyond basketball, and we go into the cultural richness that is inherent in these lovely African-American architectural symbols, but cultural institutions that speak to the American spirit of liberty and justice for all. I'm going to suggest that we think about going through perhaps the U.S. Department of the Interior to unite all of these downtown antebellum black churches, and there are 5, 1 building, Old First Baptist, and 4 extant antebellum black churches in place, and seek to obtain what I mentioned in this article through the United Nations World Heritage Designation, like the San Antonio missions. If you've been to the Alamo, you were actually at a World Heritage Site. There are only 14 in America. Mammoth Cave is the only one in Kentucky, but we do have one here. That's for archaeological reasons. There are only one criterion of about 13 that an applicant needs to meet in order to qualify. I think our black churches, do these churches together, out of everything I told you, all of that history and heritage, and these particular buildings themselves, do they represent a masterpiece of human creative genius? Well, if you're a few slaves buying pastors' freedom and starting black newspapers and building black churches, and doing these types of things, I think that's pretty ingenious. I don't know anywhere else in the world in the last 300, 400 years where this has happened, anything like it. Number 2, is there an important interchange of human values? Well, Dr. Ridgely, the surgeon, understood money. He would sell the land, and the trustees bought it. Human values, capitalism. You know what? When slaves raised their own money and brought freedom, a lot of these serious capitalists, because remember, only the wealthy whites had slaves in the first place. They respected that industry and thrift. And it showed that people have the right priorities. You're buying your wife out of slavery, and your children too, instead of being separated. And that you developed a skill that people will pay for when I let you off the plantation to go downtown and make that money. So yeah, there's an interchange of human values over a span of time within a cultural area of the world, the bluegrass, maybe even town planning and landscape design. Part 3, look, you only have to meet one of these to bear a unique or at least exceptional testimony to a cultural tradition or civilization which is living or which has disappeared. Number 4, an outstanding example of a type of building, architectural or technological ensemble or landscape which illustrates a significant stage in human history. The nice thing about UNESCO World Heritage Designation is it's not going to prevent you from using your building or take ownership or restrict the deeds, as I understand it. But your country does have to nominate you. UNESCO is the United Nations Educational, Social, and Cultural Organization. Most of these sites are in Europe. The site has to be directly or tangibly associated with events or living traditions, with ideas or with beliefs, with artistic and literary works of outstanding universal significance, like Reverend Scholar's sermon Sunday before last. The committee considers that this criterion should preferably be used in conjunction with the others. And Reverend Jones prayed some more. So here we have all of that. It's no different from the San Antonio mission, starting with the Alamo, that go about 15 miles down the San Antonio River in South Texas, and illustrate these values in a way to call attention. That's what we can leave our children, maybe. Sometimes it's more challenging. Sometimes you're called to justify or defend your heritage because it's under attack. That's not so pleasant. But if you've been thinking all along and engaging, then the response, as I think Reverend Scholar has demonstrated in the leadership of this church, the response is very clear. I told Reverend Brown, what's wonderful is that you have unity here at this particular moment of challenge, and frankly, a moment of opposition. Having been organized in 1862, And having bought this land in the 1870s is a very serious accomplishment. It's a serious accomplishment because it says, up on this rock we will build, where we have chosen. And you did, and you've been here ever since. That alone, when you are black in Kentucky, is something that ought not be molested. You have some other examples around in terms of things that have happened inside. I mean, I love Pleasant Green Baptist Church, so they're in the article, and all I'll say about them is to just read. They even edited out the last part of the historical marker in the paper, so I'm going to read what the historical marker says over there at Pleasant Green. It says historic land, and this marker went up around the time of the church's bicentennial, so 1990. My mother is sitting there, Kay Grimes Jones, and she, helping my older brother Lamont, who's also a Baptist minister, guided the application for this historic marker in the 70s. That's how long it can take. And my brother was in the Kentucky Junior Historical Society while he was a student at Lexington Junior, now LTMS, I guess. And they, correct, Arlington Elementary. And they wrote up this application to have a historic designation marked. And it says, the marker came in 1990, 2 decades later almost, and it says historic land. It reads, the land upon which Pleasant Green Baptist Church stands was conveyed in 1822 by Dr. Frederick Ridley, a white surgeon in Lexington, to trustees Harry Quills, Benjamin Adman, and Solomon Walker, all slaves. You can't tell me that black people have a problem with inferiority complexes. I don't believe it. Number one, they were always pulling their churches out, calling their own church First Baptist. That's not what people with an inferiority complex do. And then they roll up to the surgeon, calling themselves trustees, which they were. It's a Baptist church, they were trustees. Conveyed in 1822 by Dr. Frederick Ridley, a white surgeon in Lexington, to trustees Harry Quills, Benjamin Adman, and Solomon Walker, all slaves, for purpose of erecting an African church. That's all that was in the paper. But it's the next sentence that, to me, on the marker, is a point of great pride, religiously, culturally, politically, legally. From date of deed, black congregation has continued to worship at this site. And now it's 195 years. In 1790, before Kentucky was even a state, a group of black slaves gathered under their slave pastor, Peter Durrett, brother captain, and established the African Baptist Church. Today, that congregation stands, since 1822, on this site. The historic Pleasant Green Missionary Baptist Church has worshiped. And in this church, you will find not only the congregation that is the oldest black church west of the Allegheny Mountains, but you'll also find the cradle of the civil rights movement in central Kentucky. This sanctuary is a location from which James Farmer preached, and which Jesse Jackson has visited and held forth as well. Here is a church that was a charter member of the Progressive National Baptist Convention in 1961 to follow the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King's example of Protestant activism. And so from 3 slave trustees who made sure that the land was conveyed in 1822 into the present, we have this standing witness of black agency. But also it's part of a larger downtown location. And we have around us the instrumentalities of civic life. Rupp Arena to the rear, hotels, offices with banks, insurance companies, and the power center of Lexington. Pleasant Green Baptist Church. The St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church, home of the oldest existing house of worship in Lexington. begun in 1826, but the congregation was organized in 1820, one of the great freedom churches. Here one can find, behind the chancel area, a location where black slaves were hidden en route to a better life as part of the Underground Railroad. Faith and freedom right here, St. Paul AME Church, a heritage destination. This is the site known as Old First Baptist, the first African Baptist church, and that congregation was most famously associated with London Farrell, who in 1833, according to his autobiography, decided to join with other blacks and withdraw from the First Baptist Church of white citizens in Lexington. He was a very successful, very respected minister and built here the largest congregation of any race or denomination in the entire Commonwealth. 1,800 members were baptized into the membership of this church. This site, having been departed in 1987, is home to what may be a revitalization effort by Friends of First Baptist to reacquire this location, which had the largest and most impressive Sunday school building known in this area. So we look forward to the rejuvenation of this part of downtown as Old First Baptist returns to life. Here in the heart of the Constitution Historic District stands the East 2nd Street Christian Church Disciples of Christ, organized in 1851. This is a congregation that is part of the oldest America indigenous Protestant denomination, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. That denomination has its roots just about 30 miles northeast of Lexington in Bourbon County, Kentucky, where the Cane Ridge Revival in the early 1800s set off a wave of evangelical unity. And here today stands a church that has been associated with one of the relators to that movement, the Black Alexander Campbell. The relationship being to Alexander Campbell, Barton Stone, and Thomas Campbell, all three of whom were early lights in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. Main Street, Lexington, Kentucky, home of two important sites that are next door neighbors, the Mary Todd Lincoln House, the permanent memorial to the wife of our 16th President Abraham Lincoln, and the church that acquired property from the Todd family in a deeded transaction in the 1870s, the Main Street Baptist Church. 3 buildings on one campus in the heart of downtown on Main Street. Organized in 1862, this historic church is believed to have been the product of disagreements, perhaps relating to the Civil War and this church's support for the Union and the cause of absolute freedom. And so in 1862, under Frederick Braxton, for whom one of the buildings on the campus is now named, the congregation withdrew its membership. 500 of them formed a new church, the Main Street Baptist Church of Lexington, Kentucky. And here as well we have a very important symbol of also a mid-century classical church architectural design.
I believe the timing of Attorney Jones's lecture is perfect in that our church is in a crisis as a result of the expansion of the Lexington Center and the development of Town Branch Commons Park.
Once it's gone, it's gone. Once it's gone, it's gone. And this is not about architecture, I should say. Don't get it twisted. This is not about they're too attached to their building. No, that's not what. And even if you are, the truth is the building that you all built in the 60s, we never know what's going to be historic next. The way they're building these churches now, that's about to be historic because people don't build churches that look like churches anymore. So that's going to be a perfect classical example of a 1960s era Protestant rebuild. We don't know what's this, so you don't think that way when you're doing it. That's why I call this an emergency lecture as I close. I coined that term here in Lexington this evening because it's a way of a scholar who ordinarily would lecture to other audiences to commit himself to a project of alarming communities and supplying himself or herself as a co-laboring interventionist. We have to join forces, the clergy, the community, the scholars, to avert crises. This is one of religious and cultural significance. And the emergency lecture, and I thank you for inviting me to do this here, is an approach that I hope can gain traction, that other people will adopt or even seek out, because Lexington is not alone. in facing these pivotal decisions that call for an informed voting public. And my hat again goes off to your pastor, Reverend Scholar, and this entire congregation for standing up and asserting yourself once again. Nothing new for Main Street. You're here with 3 buildings. I said campus on purpose in that article. Somebody decided we're here and committed to the city. So you've stood again and you're standing again in total personhood. And you're doing it in what we call one nation under God. You are deploying the very kind of moral authority that I think African Americans as a people still, some of us, hold to in a way that is frankly unrivaled in the world. And when we do that, in the tradition of people like Dr. King and others, we can move mountains. It is my prayer and my actual projection that having been so engaged, that Lexington will get this one right, and that we never again will be called upon to justify our continuity in these meaningful spaces of witness. I thank you all for thinking with me along these lines this evening and invite you now to engage with questions or concerns.